الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا باب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم جميعا. I pray you're well, inshallah. My name is Farhan. Before we get started, I just want to request you all to please recite Surah Al-Fatiha for Sayyid Asad Jafri as well as all of our marhumin, preceded by a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Inshallah, you guys are going to have to put up with me for a short portion of today's session, as well as a couple of the subsequent sessions. We're going to be looking at verses 2 and 3 of Surah Al-Anfal, inshallah. But first, we'll mention a few points about why we're doing this. I'm sure that Brother Hussein must have mentioned some points as well in the previous sessions. But unfortunately, I haven't had the tawfiq to take a look at what he mentioned. So please sort of bear with me if there's any repetition, inshallah. As it is tradition of starting such sessions with the kalam of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhi salam, I'll quickly mention a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam and just roughly translate it in the interest of time rather than getting into an in-depth discussion about it or explanation about it. We hope through mentioning the kalam of the Imam, inshallah, that we're able to get special attention during this session and maybe he sees some good in what we are doing. So Imam Ali alayhi salam says, Tadabbaru ayatil Quran, contemplate in the verses of the Quran, wa ittabaru bihi, and in doing so, take lessons from it, learn from it. فَإِنَّهُ أَبْلَغُ الْإِبَرِ, for certainly the most sort of proclaimed of lessons are gained through doing so, through contemplating on the verses to do tadabbur in the Holy Quran. Based on what is being said here, we can understand that the Holy Quran is the most sort of perfect and complete book we have to refer to, as Imam Ali salam has mentioned, that the greatest and sort of most proclaimed of lessons, the highest level of gain is attained through contemplating on its meanings. It's worth quickly mentioning that the word proclaimed here, it does have more than one meaning, and we've used it in the meaning of showing or indicating something clearly, inshallah. So just in case anybody wants to know, the hadith can be found in Al-Ghurr al-Hikam wa Durar al-Kalim, volume 1, page 318. So moving on, inshallah, let's begin looking at the verses of Surah Al-Anfal, inshallah. So we're going to be looking at verses 2 and 3 in these sessions. Quickly recite the verses and then go through the English translation and start sort of explaining the words, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون الذين يقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. Certainly the believers are only those whose hearts tremble with awe whenever Allah is mentioned and when His verses are recited to them. They increase in faith and upon their Lord do they rely. The ones who establish prayer and spend out of what we have provided them. In today's session, inshallah, we'll only get through the first several words. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ. So now, getting into it, we start with إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Based on Arabic syntax, إِنَّمَا here is considered to be a sort of tool which is indicative of restriction and exclusivity, and basically kind of like how we translate iyaka as only you instead of just you. Um, the meaning of the word innama is of emphasis and is commonly translated as certainly or verily in order to convey the emphasis that's intended here. Here it's mentioned prior to our next word, mu'minun, the believers. So why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bringing emphasis here before the word mu'minun? The reason why he brings innama prior to mu'minun is to place emphasis on a sort of special connection which takes place between the mu'minun and the 5 traits which are going to be mentioned as the verse continues. Possessing these traits has a special connection to having iman in its sort of truest and most real sense of the word. These traits and being a mu'min sort of necessitate one another. Hence, one cannot possess these traits without being a mu'min, nor can one be a mu'min without possessing and sort of manifesting these 5 qualities that are going to be mentioned in the verse, inshallah. It's worth mentioning here that the usage of the word mu'minun is also very important. Sort of every word that is used in the Holy Quran has a reason and a hikmah of why it is used instead of something else. Using the word mu'minun implies that those who are being described here are not just those who have accepted the deen, rather it's those, not just those who have sort of accepted the deen and outwardly display their belief. These are 2 important things, but they're only part of being a mu'min. So the mu'min rather is one whose heart has sort of been impregnated with belief and one who engages in believing at all times, such as that faith is sort of part and parcel of their life. One example we can give, inshallah, is of the difference between someone who would be considered an athlete and someone who just sort of plays sports. When referred to someone as an athlete, it implies that they are engaged in sports so much that they actually identify as someone who is engaged in sports. They identify as an athlete. Whereas one who just sort of plays sports just for the sake of it, it doesn't have that same connection or relationship with sports. Hence, there is no profound sort of place in their hearts for sports. Therefore, in saying mu'minun, there's an ongoing sort of deep and profound connection between the individual and his belief and his faith, which is implied here. Going on to the next word in the ayah, inshallah, alladina, which was translated are only those. So this word is sort of just setting us up by connecting mu'minun to the 5 traits which are going to be following, inshallah. The next word is idha, which was translated as whenever. Idha is used to indicate a condition. Hence, when we have idha here, it means that sort of there's going to be something that's mentioned after it, and then a condition will come after that as well. Dhukira is the next word, which is translated as mentioned, sort of is in the passive form of the verb in past tense. Passive forms of verbs are typically used whenever we don't want to or we don't need to mention the who. So here we're not really concerned with who has done the mentioning here. Rather, it is the act of mentioning itself which holds importance. Since we're talking about the word dhukira being translated as mentioned, inshallah, we'll just pause here for a bit and we'll talk about the word dhikr itself. Dhukira comes from the root of dhikr. There are different types and levels of dhikr, although we will discuss just a few of them, and for the sake of brevity and sort of keeping things to the same level of this course, we'll just quickly mention them, inshallah. There's one, the three that we're going to mention are the dhikr al-lafzi, dhikr al-qalbi, and the dhikr al-amali. The first one, sort of being the most apparent and obvious form, dhikr al-lafzi, the one which is sort of expressed through words. It doesn't necessarily have to be words which are spoken. It could be words that are written. As long as it is through words, it is dhikr al-lafzi. The next one we're going to talk about is called dhikr al-qalbi. So this is sort of being something which is being experienced, something which you sort of feel in your heart. It could actually be a feeling which is experienced in response to the verbal expression, dhikr al-lafzi, or even in response to the third form we mentioned, dhikr al-amali, which is something expressed through actions. These types of levels of dhikr are all sort of interconnected, inshallah. So now the word Allah, we won't get into the meaning of the word Allah itself. Rather, let's aim to sort of understand its place in this ayah, inshallah. Whenever Allah is mentioned, so here we have the first part of our condition. So we said, we translated the previous parts as whenever Allah is mentioned. And so we mentioned that إذا, which came before ذكر, it's sort of used to indicate a condition. So now looking back, how we understood the word dhikr, we can now say that Allah being mentioned is not just limited to a verbal mentioning. There are two other kinds of dhikr, which we just mentioned. So the verbal was dhikr al-lafzi, and the other two are dhikr al-qalbi and dhikr al-amali. So when one experiences a sort of neediness, this can be an instance of dhikr al-qalbi, even from the most sort of primitive of needs like food and shelter, to things that are more higher, like experiencing neediness in other aspects like respect and love and piety and the intellect. One begins to realize that their neediness is compounded, that we are needy even in our able to exist. Dhikr al-amali is something which we see all around us. He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the creator of all things, and the creation can never sort of be separated from its creator. And hence, all of the creation is just an extension of the creator. And everything which exists is a manifestation of him and sort of an example of dhikrul amali. So, alhamdulillah, just a sort of quick review of what went through so far in today's session before we hand it off to the next part, to the class that you guys will be going through. We went through إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله. Certainly, the believers are only those who, whenever Allah is mentioned, and inshallah after that we'll be continuing in the next session, and whenever Allah is mentioned, again, the condition is sort of going to follow in the next session, and that is what needs to happen whenever Allah is mentioned. إذا ذكر الله, basically to reflect and necessitate true iman. There's going to be a condition that is mentioned, something that has to happen whenever Allah is sort of mentioned. And again, not just in a lafzi way. It could be dhikrul qalbi or dhikrul amali as well, inshallah. So that will conclude our session for today. And inshallah, your class will be starting soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sayyid Farhan. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. First and foremost, my condolences to the mu'mineen on the passing of Sayyid Asad. He was truly a remarkable scholar who had spent a lot of his time and effort helping the youth, helping the community in Toronto, as well as other communities internationally. And if you just want to see the number of hearts he touched, you just have to see how his funeral processions were held. It was an unprecedented um, a gathering for a funeral procession in Toronto. The entire JCC hall was packed and full. That then a lot of them, if not almost all of them, drove to the Qabristan as well to help bury him there, as well as in multiple cities throughout the world, including here in Qom. There were multiple majalises held in remembrance of him and stories about how he used to do tabligh and help the people were there as well. So this just shows to us a glimmer of the impact that this great individual had. Inshallah, in remembering him, inshallah, we can also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to encourage some of those qualities of spending our resources, our time, our efforts for the deen. And may Allah grant us that effect and that attribute as well that he had so easily embodied in his life. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Um, can everybody hear me clearly, or do I have to speak louder or up my mic volume? Okay, perfect. Um, Brother Brother Mujahid Nurani was supposed to come and teach this course as well. Unfortunately, he has a slip disc. So if you can pray for him, inshallah, to get better soon. It's very difficult for him to sit up and be able to come online and teach. So I've taken on this portion on his behalf for now. Inshallah, hopefully next week he will be feeling a little bit better and then he'll take on the teachings. There are some important questions that were asked on the WhatsApp channel, which is on the WhatsApp group, which is basically like are there practical tips to rein in the imbalanced faculty? Can an expert, quote unquote, help in faculties that are not balanced? That's it. Okay. And then another brother asked a similar question, except he said, what do our Aimma have to say in terms of helping to restore the balance in our faculties? So they're two very similar questions, but they're two very different questions in terms of the methodology of the answer. For the first one, I'm not limited to just the ahadith. I can talk based off of ilm al-akhlaq in general, not necessarily deriving that particular ilm from a particular ahadith, right? But in the second one, the brother seems to have requested specifically what the ayah may have said. I'm guessing he means that he wants explicit ahadith regarding that. So both questions are very similar in nature, but the method of response is slightly different. So we'll start with um, the intellectual response first, and we'll go into the explanation by means of a hadith before we continue the session, because this is an extremely important question to understand. So if you take into consideration, I tell you, kindly close your eyes and imagine a tree before you. Don't fall asleep because it's late in Toronto, but kindly close your eyes and imagine a tree before you. Okay. Um, the words that said influenced you. They didn't control you, they influenced you. And only if you wished to listen to those words were you then able to imagine that particular tree before you. Okay. So, um, this is something that is so if I was to want if I wanted to in any case if I wanted to influence or help you balance your faculties being components of your nafs, the aspects and capacities of your nafs, right, um, are very similar in their nature to that imaginative tree that you have. It's yours, period. Right? Others don't have direct access to it. Right? They can request by means of words, by means of teaching, they can whisper, if you will, right? They can whisper to you what to do, right? But in terms of doing that thing, right? That you're entirely alone there in the sense that it is basically your action that you have to commit. Of course, tawassul on the Ahlul Bayt and depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those actions is a no-brainer. That's obviously there, right? Even when we say you're alone there, it's in regards to other humans, not in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the system of wilayah. No, even in that stage when you're thinking and you're trying to formulate that tree, for example, you're not entirely independent in doing that. Okay. But when it comes to external help serves as a whisper, serves as a direction giver in the general sense, really, that you basically hear from the outside some tips, some tricks, and so on and so forth, and then you know what the right thing to do is, and now it's up to you to know now go and equate that right thing to the specific situation in your life, and then do the right thing by doing that equation. Okay, so external help is as good as these whispers, really. So we'll stop here for the intellectual explanation. If somebody has more questions regarding this, you can just type or put your hand up and I'll ask. Well, there's an explanation by means of a hadith here as well. And what I'll do is after class, I'll post both a link for you in YouTube from YouTube where I have discussed this particular point before, as well as if you don't have enough time to go through that link, I'll post a written summary of what's been talked about in that particular link as well. So this question is more detailedly answered there as well. Okay. We have in our riwayat that a mu'min has in his heart 2 ears, right? He has 2 ears in his heart. One ear is an ear which is divine in nature. It takes inspirations from, it takes in good inspirations, right? And one ear takes in bad inspiration. Remember, this is a mu'min who has these two. Okay. Now, it's within the capacity of the mu'min to utilize these 2 ears. So, and now the explanation of this particular hadith by means of other hadiths that are there, right? And I can share some of them, inshallah, on the group once the class finishes. As the mu'min listens to uh, non-divine inspirations, right? He's developing the pathway for non-divine inspiration coming to him more easily. So what does that look like? Well, when I get angry and now the non-divine inspiration comes that this person who hasn't listened to me, break your ties with them, okay? Or if I'm feeling the loss of, let's say, a great personality in our community, right? A non-divine inspiration comes to me and tries to demotivate me from all my religious activities. So, now that the person I was looking up to and getting guidance from isn't there, well, then what's the point of even me going to these particular activities, or what's the point of me even continuing with the tasks that I was continuing with? So non-divine whispers come, right? And then it's now the job of the mu'min here that he can either choose to listen to the non-divine whisper, right? Or he could choose to listen to the divine whisper. The divine whisper is also there as well. right? So, for example, the divine whisper is established by means of understanding um, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks from us in different scenarios. So, divine whispers can come in the form of a speech from a scholar, for example, a book you've read, thinking on the verses of the Holy Quran, right? Using your intellect to analyze the scenario and situation in a non emotional way, right? Keeping your other faculties at bay, looking at the scenario and seeing, well, can I equate this particular scenario and situation to anything that the Ahlul Bayt have taught me? For sure, they haven't left me without any guidance. It's always the case that we have guidance from them, right? So, for example, in many of the battles, whenever a whisper that the Holy Prophet has passed away would be, shouted out, the enemy would say, "Oh, the Holy Prophet has passed away," as a ploy really to win the battle, right? Certain individuals who were mu'mineen, who were steadfast in the deen, right? They would not lose even the slightest level of motivation in continuing the fight, right? They would not lose the slightest level of motivation. And when someone asks one of these individuals, I mean, someone asks them that how is it the case that even after hearing such a news, you continue fighting, right? And the response was, well, assume, for example, for a moment that the Holy Prophet perhaps has become Shaheed, right? But the Rabb of the Holy Prophet has not. And the Holy Prophet taught us to perform our actions lillah, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So in this deen of ours, right, we recognize by means of these stories from history, by means of the talks of the scholars, by means of the ayat that we read, the interaction we have with ahadith, that in fact it's not a person-oriented deen in the sense that it gets its origination from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Atiullah, and then it comes wa rasuluh. Right? And even the Rasul is wa rasuluh. It's not just a Rasul. Right? So it's the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is required from us, period. Right? And the obedience of those associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if in any time those who are associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to be martyred or were to not be around us anymore or we have no access to them, simply that should not cause us to go away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Simply that should not be a cause for demotivation for us. Okay. So this is the example of how non-divine whispers might come, right? That ear that is open to non-divine whispers listens to this particular talk, right? And how the intellect can come and combat it. At the end of the day, the faculty that has to bring balance to your other faculties is your intellectual faculty. It's not possible for me to come and bring balance to your intellect because your nafs is not mine, period. I can't somehow access your nafs and then create that balance. At the end of the day, it's you who has to do it. A very similar example is in, for example, losing weight, right? External tools can come and help you by means of telling you the importance of exercise. They can give you tools for exercise. They can give you a schedule to follow for your exercise. They can tell you about nutrition. They can lay a plan out for you. They can even help you purchase the food and put it on the table. But at the end of the day, it's your actions that are going to lead to your success in that particular endeavor. If you simply, after all that, don't choose to do the right thing after knowing it, right, then no amount of external help is sufficient for you. And we see that in history in the example of those who had denied the Holy Prophet of Islam and the Ahlul Bayt, whilst living with the Ahlul Bayt, whilst living with the Holy Prophet, for example, right, whilst being in the same cave as the Holy Prophet in some cases, right? But the individuals, unfortunately, didn't take from the Holy Prophet that which the Holy Prophet was trying to explain to them. And we had individuals in history who were significantly close to the Holy Prophet in terms of proximity, physical proximity, right? But in terms of metaphysical proximity, in terms of being, listening to, giving an ear to the Holy Prophet, well, they didn't necessarily follow him. So again, we see time and time again this idea that it's possible for external help to be present for you Yet if you don't actually act on it and take on that particular help, then the benefit simply might not be there for you. Question here for you guys. If you don't act on that external help, are you neutral, like in the sense that you just don't reach success, or are you worse off now? And if you're worse off, why are you worse off? You open your mics to talk here, you could type in something. So if external help is offered to somebody, and even then they do not reach that balance, are you worse off? Worse off with them. Okay. Ahsan. Exactly. Okay. So, and then the amount of external help giving to you, right? Is it proportional to how worse off you are? So the person who, so Brother Iqbal says not really. So let me give you a scenario and then I'll re-ask the question. The person who only had um, someone to write a gym schedule for them, and someone trying to lose weight, external help comes to them and says, hey, you should exercise and eat healthy, and the external help leaves. Okay. But this person only got two lines, try to eat healthy and do exercise. That's it. Okay. Another person who's trying to lose weight, not only does he get these two lines, someone provides him with a proper workout schedule that he can actually follow and gives him a dietary plan properly made for him, right? And takes him to the gym, buys his membership for him, buys the food, stocks up his fridge, right? It says, good luck, now you should be healthy, right? So the one who's worse off, who between these two, who is it? See, if you're looking at it as the end result, right? Then they both become equivalent, as Brother Iqbal mentioned, in the sense that if you're just saying that, well, at the end of the day, both of them are equivalently unhealthy. Okay. If your criterion for evaluation is just the fact that their weight scale says the same number for both of these individuals, then yes, you're right, they're equivalent there. But the amount of external quality, right, external help that they've denied is significantly different. Yeah. So one person has externally denied just two sentences, while the other person externally denied the entire plethora of help, basically. Right? We have this in our ilm kalam, in our ilm aqaid, when we consider certain scenarios in history where some Arabs would come to the Holy Prophet and request for a miracle. They say, if you cause this miracle to happen, then we will listen to you. We have cases there where the Holy Prophet um, um, was asked to perform a miracle. After he's already performed some miracles and after he's already explained why he is the Holy Prophet and so on and so forth, individuals would still come to him and sometimes to bother him, say, if you make this tree walk to me, then I'll believe you, right? In some cases, the Holy Prophet would provide that miracle, but in other cases, he would not. Right? One of the explanations we have in our Aqaid books, through the explanations of how the Ahl Bayt have taught us so far, right, is that in these scenarios where the Holy Prophet would not perform the miracles, it was actually a mercy for that person. If this person was somebody who was regularly trying to harass the Holy Prophet, right, like some of his tribesmen, um, like Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl and so on and so forth, right? Some of these individuals intentionally tried to harass him, and hence they'd come up and say these types of things about him. If these two stones give shahadat to you, then I'll believe in your prophethood. In many cases, he would display these miracles, but in some cases, he would not. In those cases that he would not, he was actually embodying the mercy of Allah for even those individuals. Because had he showed them those extra miracles, right, and they still denied him, right, they're in a far much worse situation than they would have been had those miracles not been shown to them. The Holy Prophet's done his job. He's proven himself to be the Prophet. He's shown enough miracles that, look, I am the Holy Prophet of Islam. He's answered enough questions to show his capacities in the intellectual field, as well as in the capacity to understanding man and their questions and so on and so forth. Right? After all that, when people still come to him for this, in certain scenarios, when there's a significant chance of the person, getting guidance, or if not that person, then perhaps those who listen to this scenario getting guidance, he'd show some miracles. But there have been cases recorded as well where he was asked to, and he said no, he didn't perform that particular miracle. This just shows you the denial of the help is in fact proportionate to overall how worse off you are. Right? So thank you for considering that. Let's go to today's content now. Before I go towards today's content, um, it is Salat al-Subh time here. Brother Farhan, when he ended the class, it had not yet become Subh for me, and I couldn't go pray. So if you uh, give me 5 minutes, I will go and I will pray, inshallah. But before I leave you, I have a question that I wish to ask of you, right, for you to consider and think of. And when I come back, inshallah, we'll continue the class. Okay. I need you to consider, right, uh, qualities of a lawmaker, right? If you want the best laws, what qualities must a lawmaker have? If you can consider this from me for 5 minutes, I'll go pray quickly, inshallah, and come back. Okay. So please, when I come back, I will take this question up. So, qualities of a lawmaker. Are you guys all there? Everybody back? Okay. So, do you guys know the qualities of the lawmaker? So, do you guys think about those? So, what qualities does a lawmaker need? If you wanted somebody to go ahead and create laws for you, what qualities would they require now? So we have not influenced by personal dunya desires, only has God-centric values, knowledge of how the item can be healthy and detrimental, kind, loving, truthful, knowledge about the needs of the people, knowledge of good and bad, not to be influenced by personal desire, compassion. Right, okay. Just learn, expert in the law, just fair, have a moral compass, just wise. Uh, So if I was to generalize your responses, the first thing that you need is um, a criterion related to their knowledge, really, right? They must know what? Well, they must know a few components. They must know the one that the laws are being made for, right? And then the higher the level of their knowledge of the one the laws are being made for are, right, the better suited that particular person is in at least this aspect for making the laws. That's one thing. They must have no personal gain. So and all the just and so on. So in terms of morality, they must have an excellence in morality, the highest levels of morals, basically. Okay, it's true. So that's the second criterion. So the first criterion being that they have to have absolute knowledge, or the closest to absolute knowledge as possible. The second law goes into they have to have an absolute what akhlaq, good morals. They have to have the best of good morals, the least worst and tainted person, the least perverted and tainted entity. So we're not necessarily a person right now, entity. Okay. Um, There was also so when I say knowledge, I include the knowledge of society as well as the knowledge of the person that they're making the laws for, as well as the knowledge of what the impact of that law is on those that are basically going to be following that particular law. So the knowledge of all of these things is important for that particular person, right? The moral characteristics of all those are there as well. The law also has to be in accordance to the capacity that the people are going to follow it, right? So that also is included in the knowledge aspect. Right? So they have to have that knowledge that can the people follow this law if I've actually put it out there, right? And a law that doesn't have the capacity to be enforced, and that's also not a very nice law. So in the sense that it basically it's not practical. I could say, let's say, you can make whatever rules we want, but at the end of the day, if there's absolutely no enforcement, and I have no actual power to, in terms of that particular law over the people, right? Then that law also kind of fizzles away. It's like in a classroom, if instead of the teacher, some random kid stands up and says, like imagine like a public school. So instead of the teacher, like random kid stands up and says, you know what, today we're gonna go for recess 15 minutes early. He could say that, but he doesn't have any power there to actually enforce that particular rule that he's trying to set. Okay. Um, so that is also required, right? And this idea of not having any self-interest and so on and so forth goes back to again that impeccability in terms of ethics, right? So it's really good. So we got all three of the points that I was hoping to get. Absoluteness, closest possibility to absoluteness in terms of knowledge, right? Impeccable ethics, right? As well as the power to actually now not only create these laws, so not only place these laws, but also what? Police them, right? To have to hold on. And even those, that policement also has to be done in terms of the knowledge that the person has and like the entity has and the traits that the entity has. Okay. Having said this now, who is the best lawmaker? You're not limited to a person, a human, right? If you were to look at existence itself, the one who has the highest level of existence in terms of knowledge and in terms of these traits, right? Such that the apex of these traits are with him, right? And has the highest authority and power to enforce the law. He knows both the creation, he knows exactly what has been created, right? He knows how it has been created in terms of what the needs are, wants are, and so on and so forth. And then, yes, as the brother says here, that the person who has this, the entity, the existence who has these qualities at the highest level, right? Right? The, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So, by definition, he has tawheed in making laws. La hukma illa lillah. There is no hukm except for the hukm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if in his hukm anything is granted to someone else, then we follow them too. So why do we follow the Holy Prophet? Well, because in the laws set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He allowed us to follow the Holy Prophet. He said, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. Right? He has said that if you want to follow me, follow these individuals as well. Okay. So why do we do tawassul? Why do we ask the Ahl Bayt for help? Because based off of some ayat as well as some riwayat, we have reached the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to go to the Nabi, to go to the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask them for shafa and ask them for a benefit, ask them to pray for us, ask them as intermediaries. Right? So we have that present in our religious text. So now when we go and we do tawassul, it's nothing but tawheed. We're actually listening to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like me telling my younger son, whenever you get stuck, go ask your older sister for help. Now when he goes to, after me telling him this, now when my younger son goes to ask his older sister for help, is he listening to his Baba? Of course he is. Because his Baba told him to go ask the older sister for help. Right? So this understanding is important. When we remember the Ahlul Bayt, when we ask them for our du'as, when we approach the harams and we do our recite our ziyarats and pay our respects, right? Um, we have been encouraged to do that by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And hence, by doing those actions, we are in fact listening to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. But here was just some side point regarding tawassul and tawheed that I wanted to cover today. Okay. So we talked about the idea that laws have foundation. They are not arbitrary. We have no such environment that is lawless. So laws are innate to humans. There's no such thing as lawlessness. Even if you were alone on an island, you would separate your eating quarters and your sleeping quarters and your washroom quarters and so on and so forth. Like the separation itself at some level is some sort of law, and they're not arbitrary, but they're rooted in something. Something might be the person's own desires, it might be the person's own wants, and so on and so forth. It might be the idea of the populace, as we mentioned last time, that whatever the majority says, for example, right? So some laws are based on a foundation which is other than a persona of a person, rather the assumed identity of a collective. Right here we have the democratic laws as we mentioned, meaning the majority of a collective comes in and decides on a law, and then that particular law now gains legitimacy by means of popularity. The last thing we talked about a law was what? Its validation. Where does it come from? Does it come from popularity or not? And then I mentioned last class that if it comes from popularity, in such a model, manipulation is very easily done. And I gave examples, said that if I wanted to change the the wants of a populace, such that I can make a law there now and they won't riot and they won't yell and shout, and they'll actually accept this law. All I have to do is change the way they think, right? So if once I change the way they think, once I change their understanding of what is success, once I change their understanding of imaginative benefits and actual benefits, then we're done. I have one. I could create a law now and go forward, right? This idea of imaginative benefits and actual benefits. I want to consider this idea and open it up today for you, inshallah. Okay. So consider this scenario. We have when I'm taking my young daughter or my young son, my 7-year-old son, uh, this past summer, we took him to the doctors to get some needles and shots and so on and so forth. Okay. So some boosters were required for him, and we took him there. And he was 6 at the time. Uh, and I remember the second the doctor talked of the needle, this guy darted out of the room. I had to run after him and catch him and pick him up and bring him back to the doctor's office. Right? So, being as clever and energetic that he is, the second the doctor started talking about, because how kids are when they're playing, they have one ear out of what's going on, right? Their defense mechanism, if you will. Right? The second he saw the doctor explain to us that there's a booster shot required and this needle isn't going to hurt him too much, but it needs to be given to him and so on and so forth. This kid booked it out of the room. Okay. So he saw a benefit clearly in running away, right? Otherwise, why would he run away? And he saw a loss in getting the needle, hence he was running away from that, right? But the question is, was that loss and that benefit that he had, that he was thinking of, benefit meaning not getting the needle, so hence run away, and the loss of getting the needle, right? So like the loss is of him actually experiencing the pain and so on and so forth. Was it an actual or an imaginative benefit? Hmm? Think about this. If it was an imaginative, why? If it was an actual, why? Why is important? I hate those questions on the test where it gives you two choices. You could pick one of them. So there's 50% chance there's an explanation afterwards. You're like, oh, no, I can't just pick one. Okay, so some people have said imaginative, and some people have said actual. Can I repeat? So my son Muhammad, he ran out of the doctor's office, right? And when he ran out of the doctor's office, what happened is that he was trying to run away from a negative scenario, right? A defect, something that he wanted to run away from, some bad thing. And in running away, he was going towards something good, which was freedom from this shot, for example, right? Right. So this benefit and this loss that he had understood, was it actual for him or was it imaginative? So the Jawad said he would run away with them. Okay. So many of you guys are saying that it was an imaginative benefit. Many of you guys are saying actual. Some of you guys said real from the kid's perspective and imaginative from your perspective. That's a very interesting answer. Okay, see this one answer here. Actual for him to he avoids pain. Okay. So some brothers have said it's actual for him again, that he avoids the pain and so on and so forth. Okay. Let's consider this. Why am I giving them, but why am I giving him that particular shot? Like as a parent, as doctor, as people who let's say like the whole institute of the health sciences and so on, so forth, assuming there's no negative secondary agenda behind it, like earning money and raking in money, and so keep all those things for the side, is to prevent, let's say, the flu for him or prevent something like measles for him, right? So in avoiding that pain, what does avoiding the pain mean for that child now? The avoidance of the pain itself here means the possibility of flu, means the possibility of measles. Okay. So the avoiding of that pain is not, if you look at it as an independent entity, you're like, oh yeah, this is actually something that he wants to get run away from. Right? But the avoidance of that, right? Avoidance of that particular pain means that action itself is the increase in potential problems, like getting the flu and so on and so forth. They're one reality, right? Running away from the doctor's office, right? It's not like he ran away from the doctor's office, and then that's one thing. Independently, let's think of that. And then the other thing is, okay, now is he gonna get the flu or not? Let's think of that independently. No, this particular shot, halal, I'm just giving the flu shot, for example, a booster shot for whatever different things that are there that need the shots for. Well, simply not getting that particular shot is equivalent to, right, that running away, right? That running away was the means of not getting that particular shot. So for those of you guys who said actual, if you limit the scope to just the pain and nothing else, right? You don't connect that pain to its other existences, which is, for example, the potential of the flu, the potential of measles, and so on and so forth, which have a lot more pain there, really, then, right? A lot more than that one prick. So in that regards, it becomes uh, you can see why someone would say it's an actual pain. It's an actual thing. Ahsan. So Brother Iqbal is correct. So it circles back to the capacity and the knowledge. So the person who has more knowledge in the scenario, the parent, they can now make a rule. But this rule for the child might seem like it's something that is very harsh, very difficult. It's hard for them to follow, right? How about the parent? The same session, let's say the doctor says you also need a shot. I'm like, oh. And unlike Brother Jawad, I don't run away. Like, Tom, I said, you know what? Let's all what this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Let's just get it. No, they don't do that. So imagine the doctor comes to me and says, you know, you need a shot as well. So like, the flu season is coming up and you get sick every single year for like 3 months, 4 months in the year you're sick, right? You get hay fever and so on and so forth. You need the shot too. Okay. What will happen? Will I run away? No. Will I take that shot? Yes. Why will I choose that shot? Because I understand that there's actually that the choosing of the shot is equivalent to prevention of something much greater, a greater pain for me. Right? So with the capacity of the intellect increasing, right, the reaction to laws changes too. So in the case of my son, I had to grab him, literally grab him, bring him to the doctor's office. And the doctor told me, hold him down because this guy was moving too much and it's not safe to go shot like that. So we talked to him first and gave him candy and talked to him and made him all happy. And then I distracted him. And while I was distracting him, I was holding his hand at the same time so he doesn't move it. And started got him to talk about some things that he really likes to talk about, right? Once he talked about that, while he was talking about his, dinosaur Lego toy that he has, that he really was so happy for, in the middle of talking for that, right? There was a prick that was felt, but because he was involved in something else, that prick wasn't even felt that much before, like he was able to finish her work uh, much quickly, and he didn't cry nearly as much as he would have if he was just looking at the needle, for example. So no kids were hurt in this example. At least amount of pain was given. But yeah, so this example is there to explain this particular concept to you. So now, when the lawmaker has these traits within them, that they have the highest level of knowledge, they have the highest level of ethics to them, right? As his Baba, I was not out to hurt him. If I had an inkling that the doctor was trying to just make money out of this or hurt my son, right? I would, before my son running away, I would run away with him, I wouldn't put my son in the situation that any harm could come to him at all whatsoever, right? So now what of the one who has absolute love towards the creatures that he's made? So now the laws that are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has absolute knowledge, right? At the same time, um, has absolute love as well and compassion, right? And wisdom. But now these traits by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces himself matter. They're not just sprinkled throughout the Holy Quran willy-nilly without reason and purpose. They're directly linked with the message that that verse or that particular um, point is trying to make. And listen, this point becomes easy to accept when you understand who it's coming from, and Allah kind of emphasizes some of his traits for us. Okay. Well, this was the point regarding actual benefits and imaginative benefits. Link this to the other paradigm now, the paradigm where the validation of laws would be based off of popular opinion, right? You can easily see all I would have to do is create some imaginative benefits for the populace, and all of a sudden the populace decides, you know what, let's go for it. If I create imaginative benefits for them, right? In sales, they first create the need, right? And then they sell you the solution for that particular need. And sales tactics is one thing that's actually taught, unfortunately. So all they would have to do is first create that particular imaginative benefit, right, for the populace, and then all of a sudden, they could create laws and create things and so on and so forth, which the populace would easily then follow through. That's problematic. Right. So all that we've talked about right now, a slightly more academic version of it, I'll send a written text regarding, inshallah, at the end of the session on the group. Go through that written text. So now with this explanation in mind and this understanding in mind of the scenario, right? Going through that academic text will significantly assist you. You will be able to understand that, and it'll actually open up some pathways uh, open up some pathways for you to consider and think of. The brother just messaged saying that he's going to get the flu shot tomorrow. Please pray for him, inshallah. Allah not that you get the flu, and may He decrease the pain for you. Yeah, so popular laws need to change frequently, and they do change frequently. Why? Because social preferences changes frequently. Sometimes that social preference is changed intentionally, right? Sometimes meaning that someone sets up a trend and so on and so forth. Other times no. So for example, if you take the scenario right now, right? If you notice the mainstream media and how they're covering the situation that's going on in some parts of the world, right? Well, sometimes we see that only one side of the story is listed. The other side isn't. I'm going to share with you guys on the same WhatsApp channel a clip of an interview between Piers Morgan and one other person, an Egyptian comedian. It's an interesting way of, the way he responds, I find it to be very interesting. He gets the point across in a very beautiful manner, right? Um, Sometimes if I want to change the way people think, right, all I have to do is tell them one side of the story. If I tell them one side of the story for long enough, what happens? Well, that's the only side that they have access to. They have much more detailed understanding of that particular side. And the other side, I simply don't give them the details of, and hence, it's easier for me to influence the way they think. So when laws are made, last point, inshallah, I'm going to end the class. How are we doing for time, by the way? I don't want to go over. Do we have time? Do you have like 10 minutes? I think so, right? 6. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So we'll end the class earlier today. I'll end it in 10 minutes. Let me just go through this particular point. This is the last point for today, then we'll end it, inshallah. Consider this, okay? So we have the lawmaker, we have the law itself, and we have the one for whom the law applies to. Okay, we have these three things that we're considering: the lawmaker, the law itself, and the one for whom the law is applied to. Okay, so every law has a purpose to it, sometimes the purpose is linked to just the lawmaker. Other times it's linked to the one whom the law is applied to, right? Or linked to both of them. In any case, there's always a purpose behind the law. Okay. So the benefits sometimes simply go back to the lawmaker. For example, a teacher makes a rule that any student who gets 100% on an exam, they have to give candy to the teacher. Okay. They have to come and give candy to the teacher. The purpose, so in this particular case, the law is made and the entire benefit of it goes to who? Goes to the teacher, right? In some cases, right, as you can see, situations occur where the benefit entirely goes to the one who's following the law. Okay. In some cases, that benefit is shared between the one who's making the law and the one who's following the law. Okay. In the case of our deen and the laws of our religion, so these are the two paradigms we're working with. We're working with the paradigm of the deen, the Islamic worldview, and we're comparing that right now with the mainstream worldview as well. In the case of the mainstream worldview, right, the attributes of the people making the law there, right, require that the benefit also go back to the lawmaker as well. So at the very least, it's shared benefits. So by means of, for example, tax laws and this law and that, at some point, something is to be gained by the lawmaker themselves. Okay. In terms of the divine laws, however, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in need from us, right? We believe in Tawheed in the sense that He is the all-independent. If He is the all-independent, now we know what that means. That means that He is not dependent on us entirely. So any law that is coming and originating in Him, in His words, right? No benefit of that goes back to Him. It's not the case that He has anything to gain by me following this law. No, He is the all-independent. In that scenario, the entirety of the benefit goes to who now? Goes to me. So consider this, please. We have the law, the lawmaker, right? And the one, so we have the lawmaker, the law, and the one who will abide by the law. So just as the verses in C2 in the previous unit pointed out, success is for those who purify the nafs and failure is for those who corrupt the nafs. So the law created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if that's the criterion now, which links to success and failure, right? The laws created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now are the ones which, if followed, are keeping all aspects of man's creation into account. Why? Because he has absolute knowledge, remember? Of absolute knowledge of what? Of every person created, of every capacity that each person has, right? Of every want each person has, and every scenario each person created is going to be placed in. His absolute knowledge of this. After this, if Allah comes forth, right, it's coming from an absolute level of knowledge, from the absolute ethical source. The laws created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are ones which, if followed, are keeping all aspects of man's creation into account, including their desires, fears, aspirations, potentials, and their weaknesses. The purity of the nafs then is based on how well man stayed away from that which the law forbade, and how sincerely he acted on that which he has to do as per the law. So, our brother has just asked a question on the group: is the intellect then necessary to adhere to these laws? So, absolutely. In the next chapter, the brother Mujahid, inshallah, if he feels better, we'll look at the conditions of who these laws apply to, and an innate condition is for somebody who can first and foremost understand these laws. A minimum intellectual capacity needs to be maintained for that. Now, in terms of the faculty, the more the faculty of intellect for a person increases, the better it is for them to adhere to the law. So let's go back to our example of the flu shot, right? My daughter who's 8, right? First of all, gender matters here because a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old in terms of years are very close, but a 7-year-old boy in terms of maturity and an 8-year-old girl in terms of maturity are two different creatures, very far apart. So while my son Muhammad, ran out of the room and just, didn't even look back. My daughter Nargis, who was 8 years of age, right, hearing about shots and so on and so forth, she didn't run away. She didn't like, uh, um, go after, she was upset. She was telling me, I don't want it, Baba, and so on and so forth. But we could work with her. We could explain to her and talk to her. So her intellectual capacity was slightly better. So no point arguing with one. So Brother Iqbal's point here is that so no point arguing or debating divine laws with someone who doesn't fully understand Tawheed. So when if you were to debate and discuss the actual jurisprudence of a law, you could say, look, following this law has these benefits for us, right? For example, let's look at um, the the law that men should lower their gaze. Men should not look at everything that they want to look at. Okay, so this law has a lot of benefit for men. You don't end up comparing your spouse and your partner and so on and so forth. But before your marriage, when you're actually don't have a spouse, you don't trigger yourself into going into a state where your faculty of desire wants to take over and it makes you do actions and things where you later on feel dissatisfied with yourself and sad and so on and so forth. Um, so this law has some benefits. So you can explain in this term some benefits of the law. Sure, those are possible, right? But in terms of fully fathoming the capacity of where this law is coming from, but only a person who understands that the lawmaker here actually knew me, knew the scenario I'm in, knows that I'm trying to get married but don't have a spouse, let's say, right? Knows that I'm going to this university and I'm going to that university, I'm in this particular situation. And yet, after all this knowledge, and he's also kind, he's also loving, has placed some laws on me. Now, following those laws, I can do it with a peace of mind. Right? Like in the scenario, I might still have pressure. I might still feel pain. I might still not be fully at the stage of rida, completely submissive, absolute submissiveness. Like in the case of my daughter, for example, she was still saying, I wish I didn't have to get this and so on, but she was so much more mature about it, right? She didn't leave the room. When the doctor said, can you please put your arm out? She willingly put her arm out because she knows that this is something that's going to help her. She doesn't like, we reminded her how she feels when she gets the flu, how she can't have ice cream then, how she can't be with her friends, she can't go see other people outside. And all of a sudden, when we explained those things to her, because she was more mature, intellectually speaking, right? Well, she put her own arm out, right? So did it hurt her? Yes. Was she still feeling like, oh, I wish I didn't have to go through this? Probably, yeah, right? But the reactions to the law drastically changed based on the intellectual faculty. Okay. So arguing or debating with people about divine laws in particular, you can debate about their intellectual benefits and lack thereof, their social benefits and lack thereof, and so on and so forth. That type of a comparison can be done. But in terms of an actual talk regarding the reality of that particular law, the reality of that law can only be understood once you understand the lawmaker, right? So yeah, so somebody who understands Tawheed at the level that they understand Tawheed, none of us fully understand it, right? At the level that they understand Tawheed, then that particular discussion carries its own particular weight. Another question or comment by one of the brothers. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our unique situations, He understands our abilities to adhere to these laws, our intellect and our ability to express it. So everyone has a unique judgment rather than a general one, correct? Absolutely correct. In the sense that so it's absolutely correct, has to be understood properly. Right? Let's say somebody who in the house of a mujtahid where they don't have They go to university here, but there's hijab there in the sense that in Qom at least they're separate the men's class and the women's class, let's say, and then let's say they do that. They don't in some universities they don't do that. But let's say they had that, right? There's no malls with these big picture billboards of God knows what and so on. So this teenage son of a mujtahid, for him to fall into a shahwati desire, well, there just simply isn't external factors that led him to do that, right? So for him to say, listen, I prevented myself from going into the shahwati sins, right? The desired sin, the sins of the faculty of desire, right? Well, simply that opportunity didn't arise for him that much. It's like, for example, me and you, those people who are from an Indo-Pak background, we naturally have a distaste for pork and haram meat in that regard. Like pork, if someone even put it in front of you, you wouldn't eat it. Like you socially, you've developed a distaste for it. Okay. So for somebody who's socially developed a distaste for it, when they stay away from pork, that's one thing, right? So a recent revert who's eaten pork their whole life and it was their favorite meal, let's say, and when they refrain from pork, it's an entire thing. That judgment criteria is specific to you. Both have to refrain from it, huh? It's not the case that had said that, oh, oh no, you know what, for you, I'm going to change the laws. No, the bare minimum ahkam are same for all mukallafin, all the people who are supposed to be following the Muslims, right? But the value associated with the following and the obedience is unique to the person's situation, right? So this is understood appropriately and correctly. So now, what does being a Muslim mean? Taslim, right? It means I submit my faculties to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I submit willingly. Ita'ah wa ati'ullah. Now, the submission is why the one who obeys these laws now calls themselves a Muslim. He says, now I submit myself to these particular laws, to the one who made these laws by means of these laws, right? So the one who who is entirely submissive willingly, right, to the decree of his Rabb is now considered and called what? A Muslim. This is what being a Muslim means. The identity of a Muslim is somebody who understands first who he's submitting to, and because he understands who he submits to, he submits to that particular entity. He understands his Rabb to be the Almighty, the All-Independent, the All-Perfect, and then he submits to that particular Rabb. And hence he becomes now a Muslim. So this ends the discussion for today. Inshallah, let me answer some of the questions that you guys might have, and then anybody who wants to leave can leave, inshallah. The class is ended. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So over here,